Welcome to the fairest show on television. Nice to have you along with us. First tonight, the White House is right. Today, the press secretary faced another round of withering questions about labeling the cartels as terrorist organizations. And to a certain extent, the press secretary's answer was honest, direct, and generally correct.
Designating these cartels as FTOs would not grant us any additional authorities that we don't really have at this time.
FTOs is foreign terrorist organization. The problem isn't the authorities or what you designate the cartels. The problem is how you treat them. President Biden and his team continue to deal with the cartels as a law enforcement issue, not a military threat. The leaders of the cartels, by that logic, are criminals that need to be arrested, like Los Chapitos, who took over for their dad, El Chapo, in the Sinaloa cartel, or Mencho, who runs the Cartel de Jalisco. In fact, the cartels are much closer to ISIS. Their leadership is much closer to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi or even to Osama bin Laden than they are to the American mafia and Al Capone. In that sense, the White House is right. Calling them terrorist organizations does nothing. Treating them as terrorist organizations changes the ballgame. And so far, there is zero appetite at the White House to treat them as terrorist organizations. And to be fair, if the White House designates them as terrorist organizations, Karine Jean-Pierre will face far more difficult questions about why the White House then isn't treating them like terrorists and going after them like we do terrorist organizations, like we did ISIS, like we still do against terrorist organizations in Syria and often in Africa. Right now, the White House says they're working with Mexico to stop the cartels. You can be the judge of how that's going. But one Republican senator is offering a more clear message to the Mexican president.
To the president of Mexico, fentanyl is a weapon of mass destruction being unleashed on America from your country. It's coming from your country.
Senator Lindsey Graham standing by. He's proposing legislation to authorize military force against the cartels. We start with Jorge Ventura in northern Mexico, not far from where the cartel kidnapped 4 Americans and killed 2 of them. Jorge, there's been a lot of questions about why these people were in northern Mexico. As you're there, are you seeing a lot of other Americans around? Is it a place that the cartels own? Is it a place that you've got a lot of Mexican military? Just set the scene for us.
Yeah, Leland, right now we actually have heavy law enforcement. So as soon as you actually walk through the port of entry, you'll see Mexican State Police cruising around. You have your local police, but you also have the National Guard here, and it's been a heavy law enforcement presence all day here. Now, in our start of our day, we were actually very shocked. As we were on our way to Matamoros, we actually encountered 2 Americans from Louisiana who actually are making their way to Matamoros, who say they're crossing over for a medical procedure. We asked them if they were aware of the recent cartel kidnappings, and they said yes, that they were concerned about it, but that it was still worth the trip, that they wanted to save money. And we were pretty shocked, considering that kidnapping was less than a week ago. Americans are still coming over to Matamoros for their medical procedures. So that was pretty surprising to start the day off today.
One of the people who was kidnapped and now released has a long rap sheet, including narcotics trafficking and a number of other problems. As you're there, and obviously there's an enormous amount of police presence in the military, as you saw and we showed some video of. But when you talk to locals there, and I know you've got a really great group of sources inside northern Mexico, but for the kidnapping a couple of days ago of Americans, is this an area of northern Mexico that the cartels normally control, or the Mexican police and Mexican military controls?
So here, Leland, what my sources are telling me that in the last recent years, there's been kind of this. Now, what they're telling me is that the Gulf Cartel has now fully controlled this area, especially the northeast of Matamoros, and that's where those Americans were discovered, on the northeast side of Matamoros. So you actually kind of feel it here. Even when we were crossing in, Mexican locals letting us know that we were most likely going to be surveillance and being watched. Some locals actually advising us not to take any Mexican taxis, because those taxis could be keeping an eye on us, because we are reporters. So you do feel it right here. It's really controlled by the Gulf Cartel. What's actually really interesting, Leland, is other cartels are distributing multiple drugs like fentanyl, crystal meth, and etc. But here is a key crossing point for the Gulf Cartel for cocaine. So this is a major cocaine distribution route for that Gulf Cartel, and you see it here and you feel it here in person.
Interesting. Eric Williams' rap sheet includes cocaine charges, so make of that what you will. Real quick, Jorge, as you've talked to locals there who've lived under the thumb of the cartels that control that area of the country, do they tell you it's more like living under a normal government, or is it like what we would hear out of Syria and Libya, for example, where you were living under the thumb of a terrorist organization that would behead, that would kill, that would torture people that they didn't like?
You know, when I speak with locals here, they fear the cartel. They, talk about them almost like a terrorist organization. But the other side here, Leland, is for Mexican locals, this is just a way of life. It's completely normal. The kidnappings don't even shock the locals anymore. It's a completely normal thing. Them just saying that the only reason that the media is getting covered this time is because it's involving Americans. But that's just really the way of life for the Mexican people. They've kind of accepted it. Many of them don't trust the Mexican police or the federales at all here. So that's kind of the common trend from all Mexican border towns from my experience. Another keynote here, Leland, we are still waiting for those 2 Americans to be transferred back to the U.S. and 2 deceased bodies. We were outside the morgue today. That could actually still happen tonight or tomorrow. And once we do have that, we will bring you the latest update there.
Yeah, thank you. As you point out, because it's Americans we're covering, it happens every day to families in Mexico, innocent families as well. Jorge, thank you very much. Joining us now, Senator Lindsey Graham, South Carolina, ranking member of the Judiciary Committee. Good to see you, sir. As always, thank you. You proposed legislation authorizing military force against the cartels. They are terrorist organizations. Yeah. What does a war against the cartels look like? Are we talking Predator drones? Are we talking Delta Force? Or are we talking an invasion?
Not an invasion. You're talking about taking down drug labs, going after the leadership, probably a combination of cyber attacks, a combination of drone attacks, maybe manned aircraft, maybe Delta Force raids. What I'm trying to do is not let this become normal for the United States. I really feel bad for the people in Mexico. They live in a terrible environment. Why am I doing this? 70,000 people last year died of fentanyl overdoses. More people died from fentanyl poisoning than car wrecks and gun violence combined. More people died last year in 1 year from fentanyl than the entire Vietnam War. Is coming from Mexico with help from China. Let me tell you about foreign terrorist organizations. I have a little different take. Why am I trying to make them FTOs? Under the U.S. law, if you provide material support to a foreign terrorist organization, you're subject to being prosecuted. So if you're a China chemical company and you're helping the drug cartels in Mexico, we have extraterritorial jurisdiction against you. But the main push here is to make them terrorists under U.S. law and act like they're poisoning America, they're killing Americans in droves, and act like it's a threat to our country. We kill terrorists every night all over the planet because they're trying to hurt us. And what I'm suggesting is that we make the drug cartels FTOs and we give the military the ability to use lethal force to take them out.
You think about the cartels, a lot of them are bigger than ISIS ever was, certainly combined. They've got 36,000 soldiers. That's double the size of the 101st Airborne Division. When we're talking about real armies that are well armed. Passing this law, if it was signed even, fine. President Biden would have this military authority. So far, he's shown no desire to want to use any military authority or military action against the cartels. On an even deeper level, do you even trust the Biden administration and Secretary of Defense Austin to prosecute a war competently against the cartels?
Well, what I'm trying to do is bring to the table solutions that don't exist today. I reject the status quo. The law enforcement model, as you articulated in your opening, is not working. You know, the fentanyl problem is an epidemic in America getting worse. So, no, I'm not commander-in-chief, but I'd like to give the commander-in-chief congressional authorization to use force to stop the poisoning of America. If they don't use it, we'll have an election in 2024, and people can run on a platform. I would use it if I could. So the point I'm trying to make is that the current situation is untenable. The Mexican government is no longer in charge of most of their country. It's a narco-terrorist state, and we should put on the table the tools of our military to go after these terrorists as if they were any other terrorist. And they're killing more Americans from drug cartels in Mexico than all the terrorist activity combined since 9/11.
You and I talked during the raids on ISIS and the beginning of the war on ISIS. They beheaded 6 or 7 Americans, tragically, horrible. And we went after them and took care of business. That's a little different than what we're seeing right now. This is President Biden talking about the Mexican relationship, in which he said that this is Mexico is not our backyard. In our backyard, it's in our front yard, our front door neighbor. It was a nice point he made at the Cinco de Mayo celebrations. Do you have any realization from the White House that they take this seriously and that they realize that the Mexicans just aren't up to this?
Well, that's a good question. Is it a lack of will? They just don't have the will to take their country back from the terrorists. Or is it capability? They don't have the capability. Let me give you an example from 2000. Bill Clinton, a Democratic president, came up with an idea called Plan Colombia. We sent military forces to the country of Colombia to work with their military and their law enforcement officials to take down the cocaine trafficking networks. FARC was a terrorist organization, a leftist group that was being financed by cocaine, and they were poisoning America. It worked. So I'm suggesting a Plan Mexico, that we work with the Mexican government to take back Mexico from the terrorists and protect Americans. And if they don't want to work with us, then we'll use the authority we have to protect our nation from enemies, foreign and domestic. The narco-terrorist state in Mexico is a failed state when it comes to fentanyl distribution, and they need to be held accountable for what they're doing to Americans. And as a last resort, I would put on the table using military force unilaterally to protect Americans from being poisoned by drug cartels in Mexico.
And it's not just poison, right? I mean, when we were down there on the border, the drug cartels are clearly view themselves as more powerful than most of U.S. law enforcement. In many cities, they outgun U.S. law enforcement. They've shot at the National Guard. We were on a patrol boat going up and down the Rio Grande. They were flying drones over the Texas Department of Public Safety. So they have a very clear understanding of what the rules of engagement are for the United States. I'll end with this. It is very easy to start wars. Very. And yet, in Afghanistan, we saw how hard it is to end wars. I know you've been speaking out passionately about that. We still have no end in sight to 900 U.S. troops that are in Syria still, years upon years later. We still are in the Philippines, on and on and on. If you all of a sudden start putting boots on the ground in Mexico to deal with this, how does this end?
Well, I tell you, here's your options. To continue to do nothing or continue to follow policy that fails. Why do we have a military? What's the whole purpose of having a military? To protect the country. Here's what I want. I'm tired of being terrorized by drug cartels. I want them to sleep very poorly at night. I want them to understand if they get on the phone, it may be the last phone call they make. They're living in opulent homes. They live a life of luxury from dead Americans. The blood of America fuels the drug cartels. I want to blow them up. Well, whatever it takes, as long as it takes. I don't want to be attacked again. I don't want Afghanistan to be used to attack us again. I don't want ISIS to come back in Syria. I hate that we're in these wars, but the worst thing you can do is let the enemy run you over. Well, I am tired of being run over by drug cartels in Mexico. I want to change the game. We will kick their ass if we go into it to win it. I want to go into it to win it. And the biggest beneficiary, Leland, will be the Mexican people who don't have to live under fear anymore.
It's a great point, and that's why I wanted to talk to Jorge about that. And I know you picked up on that. Is the biggest victims in some ways are the people who are living under the thumb of the cartels. Yeah, Predator drones have a way to make you have an uneasy night's sleep. It's good to see you, sir. Thank you.
God bless.
Yes,
thanks.
Sir.